Hey guys, so the purpose of this video is to talk about evaluation and creation of a major assignment for a competency-based course. In your readings, you read about things like true-false exams, multiple choice exams. Those are great as low-stakes assignments that are used to assess comprehension and understanding. So thinking about the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy. Then we move on to short answers. Short answers, you're getting some brief application or personal reflection happening, but we're not really getting super in-depth. So that's still not, a short answer is still not enough to assess competency mastery. To assess competency mastery, we've got to be at a higher level. And so in an academic setting, that's going to look like an essay. That's going to look like a major project with a written product. In this class, for example, putting together a course matrix, syllabus, all the supporting documentations to show that you know how to put together a course, right? Collectively, your portfolio that you turn in at the end of the semester is your major product. It's a written product that I can use to show folks who care about our university's accreditation through CEEF that yes, you mastered this course. Look at your portfolio of materials. So a competency-based education requires a higher level of demonstration of knowledge than a completion of a true-false exam or any kind of multiple choice short answer exam. So that's a big shift from how many of us were quizzed, especially perhaps in undergrad or our master's program. So even at our master's level now, we have to do other assessments. If you came through our master's program a few years ago before we shifted to CEEF, you might have done a lot of multiple choice exams. And now you're going to find that you're doing more essay exams, more projects, more major products that you're turning in. That's intentional. So how does this translate to the community? In the community, you've got to be really creative about it. And it's really going to matter, it's going to depend on your content area, right? So if I am teaching skills that can be directly assessed, then participant observation is a great way to do that. Maybe I have some sort of a feedback sheet where I'm watching my participants do something, or students, do something, and I have some sort of standardized rubric that demonstrates skill mastery. So maybe doesn't meet, partially meets, fully meets, and I have a whole list of sub-competencies or skills that they need to achieve in order to demonstrate mastery, right? And as they go through it, I'm demonstrating and I'm grading them on that and offering feedback, right? So think about if you've ever had a CPR class. That's exactly what I recall from my days when I took a CPR class. We had to do the compressions and the rescue breathing. We had to talk about what we were doing. We had to remember to say call 911 before we began. All of those different things we had to do, adjust the neck. And they had a rubric that they were checking off and observing us to make sure we did it correctly. So that's one way to do an assessment in a community setting. And then you just have this documentation of mastery. Oftentimes in a community, that might be all you need. If you're doing something that's more of an academic or certification based, you may need something a little bit more. So think about your setting, think about what's appropriate. Also in a community setting, you may not want to do low stakes assignments like here, take this quiz or this little multiple choice true false exam. You're going to want to lean more into probably gamification, right? So thinking about crossword puzzles or workbooks, right, are really, participant workbooks are really common things we use in community settings. So you're going to do different ways of assessments, right? You're going to have lots of small group discussions in which you are talking to folks and assessing understanding and knowledge. And those work well in a community setting that oftentimes an academic setting requires a bit more documentation, right? And it's going to depend on the setting in which you're teaching and delivering your course as to what level of documentation you need. So you're going to have to think about your discipline and what's appropriate. All right, so then let's think about how we build a course assignments and evaluations from low stakes to high stakes. And so let's look at that. And to do that, I'm going to refer again to PhD 1122, which is the first semester doctoral theory course that many of you have been exposed to, which is why it's a good example. So this is this year's course syllabus for PhD 1122. And you'll notice that this course meets two competencies. One DRPH competency, which is to evaluate the appropriate use of social or behavioral science theory in developing and evaluating community-based interventions. And it meets PhD 10.5 competency, which is to integrate behavior, organizational, and policy theory as needed in plans to improve well-being. Full disclosure, this one does not fully meet this competency. I would argue that it only partially meets it. And in fact, if I were to update the syllabus, I would say this course partially meets PhD T5. Why? Because I don't talk about organizational policy level theories, right? I'm only at the individual and group level space. But notice this. This is what tripped some of you guys up before. So in particular here, DRPH1, evaluate the use of social and behavioral science theory in developing and evaluating community-based interventions. So notice here we've got to define a construct of a theory, articulate it, use the literature to select the theoretical constructs that aid in understanding factors, use those constructs to propose an intervention, select a population's behavioral health topic and the appropriate use of the intervention, the appropriate use of social or behavioral science theory for basically developing an intervention and evaluating it in a community setting. And then there's other things, right? Evidence table, peer review, things that I think are important. But these first course learning objectives are about evaluating the right theory to be used in a community to develop an intervention, right? And so that's what I was getting at with your comments around the community-based, your competency-based selection, your selection of competencies. So I want to see, I don't want an exact reword, but I do want to be able to see how your course learning objectives are setting you up to meet that competency. All right, so there's that. So then once you have that set, and with your matrix, you're creating your course of topics that you're going to use, your different modules, right? We've talked about that already. Once you have all of that framed out, then you can start thinking about your actual assignments. And I just want to start here, and you're going to see that we have low stakes moving up to high stakes assignments. And so at the beginning of this course, in weeks 4 through 13, each week their students read a chapter about a particular theory. And they do an ungraded quiz that's multiple choice, true, false. And those questions are used to assess reading comprehension and just to make sure they understand what they've read before they come to class and we're discussing it and applying it in small group work. Then, because we want students to apply what they're learning in class to a population and behavior of interest to them, we start off with another low stakes assignment where we ask them to develop a focus statement. This is simply them reflecting in the first part of the semester about what is their population and what is their behavior. And we only ask them just to write a paragraph. After that, we're asking students to develop evidence tables. And in those evidence tables, we ask them to do that. Those are the first major assignments they turn in, right? And I would say these are not major assignments. I would argue they're probably medium stakes assignments. So the quizzes and the focus statements are low stakes. The evidence tables and the intervention table are medium stake assignments, meaning that there are some significant points attached to it, but not a tremendous amount of points, right? Each table is worth 6 points, so a total of 18 points. That certainly is enough. If someone were to not do well on their tables, that's enough to keep them from getting an A in the course. However, it's not enough to just really be devastating to their grade, right? It's not a huge high stakes point, but it is significant still. And in those evidence tables, what we're doing is we're asking students to do the literature review about the theories that are most applicable to their population and behavior, and to understand which constructs have been most modifiable for their behavior with their population. Then they're doing intervention tables in which they do the same thing, except now they're trying to summarize which interventions have most been used for their behavior with their population. And so with the tables, the students are then set up to write theory papers. And the theory papers are high stakes assignments. You can see they've got more points allocated to them. Students have to write 2 papers. Each one is worth 30 points. This is now a significant part of their grade. It's very high stakes. And we have very specific instructions about what the students need to do. And those instructions, as we're going to look at a moment, are linked back up to the competencies and the learning objectives. Finally, we have a synthesis assignment. And in my class, 1122, the synthesis assignment is actually a low stakes assignment again, or maybe a medium stakes assignment. But it does still bring everything together, and it's a written product. And so I bring that forward just to say, I end with this idea of teaching students how to do an APHA abstract and a poster for a conference. And it's a nice way for them to show me what all they've learned in this class and to think about how they might use it going forward with future projects or research in their area of interest with their population and behavior. But I make it intentionally low stakes. It's at the end of the semester, and I'll talk about why I do that, right? I do that in part because I am focused on the theory paper, right? Ultimately, my course is a preliminary exam prep course in which students have to write theory papers as part of their preliminary exam. And so I am really teaching them the skills that they need to hopefully be successful when they take their prelim after completing their first year in our program. So for me, that's the high stakes. That's what's most important. It's not explicit in my competencies. However, if they achieve these competencies and they do well in these papers, they should be set up because I have this other unwritten component that's prelim prep that I have to do. And so that's why I put a lot of emphasis on those theory papers. And then at the end of the semester, when I know students are trying to wrap things up, I just want them to synthesize the material and think about how they're going to go forward, but I'm not trying to stress them out at the end of the semester. I know that they have other classes with large major final products that they're taking in conjunction with my course. And so I actually schedule my course so that the major assignments are complete by week 13, and then they're just turning in a poster and they actually grade each other on it. And so we'll talk about that. I'm going to scroll down really fast, so watch your eyes. We're going to go to how I provide instructions and how I do grading. So real quick, we're going to scroll down really fast and we're going to talk about that. So as you know, I put everything into one document, my syllabus, my course schedule, and the instructions for all assignments. You do not have to do it my way. Every teacher has their own way. Some teachers like to give out the instructions to assignments as they're coming due and talk about how it's going to be graded as it's coming due. I do it all at the beginning. It's personal preference. Think about what would work best for your students. I do it at the beginning because my courses are building on each other, and I want students to understand at the very beginning of the semester, how do these assignments build upon each other to get to the final product. So you can see in my class, I do not use rubrics except for the final assignment, and we'll talk about that for a moment. In my class, what I'm doing here is I am giving students specific metrics and questions that they have to answer. And based off of that, whether it's a high or a low stakes assignment, I take off anywhere from a half a point to a point per error. If it's a low stakes assignment, I tend to take off a half a point per error. If it's a high stakes assignment, like the theory papers, I take off 1 point per error. We'll talk about those theory papers in just a moment because I have a very specific approach that I use that you can think about whether it's right or not for you. So with most of my low stakes assignments, they are geared up so that everybody usually makes an A or a B on those assignments. They're low stakes. I just want students to think things through, but they can still lose points. you'll notice after every assignment that I write, I always have how is this going to be graded, right? So my grading is a little bit vague here. So your response to these questions to demonstrate your current understanding of your area of study. Ensure your responses are well written and substantive, right? This is a 1-point assignment. So basically, everyone gets full credit if they answer all the questions. Just being really transparent, right? They might lose a half a point if they didn't answer a question. So, but that's kind of how I'm handling that. With the evidence tables, you can see I give students specific questions I want them to answer. I give them a template that they need to complete. So basically, they are filling out a template, and these questions are embedded in the template. And I give them specific guidance for how it should be filled out. It needs to be APA 7. They need to provide enough detail that they never have to see the article again. They should not cut and paste, put it on their own words. Check for grammar, but use bullets, that's fine, right? Spell check it. And then you can see now I'm being a little bit more specific. Each time you submit your table, you should have a minimum of 12 new citations for a total of 36. Points will be deducted for failure to follow APA 7, lack of detail, copy and pasting from an article, or spelling errors. Each citation is worth a half a point, which means if a student makes an error on a particular citation, they lose a half a point per citation. Now, in practice, I'm not always that strict. In practice, I'm usually going to deduct a half a point if I only see one error on the table. If I see 2 errors, 1 point. Like if I see a whole bunch of APA 7 errors, I'm not going to fail a student on that assignment for APA 7 because it's a lower stakes assignment. Instead, I'll probably take off 1 point for APA 7 out of the 6, which if you do the math is still, if I take 1 point out of 6 points away, I've just taken away an A. They're down to a B, right? And I basically leave a note saying, please make sure you check your APA. That's the most common mistake I have. So I'm a little bit generous with my grading in that way. I choose not to use a rubric so that I can be a little bit more generous with my low stakes assignments and a little bit stricter on my high stakes assignments. There is a huge discussion about whether or not you should use a rubric. In some situations I use it, in some situations I don't. We're going to get down to in a minute when I use a rubric, and we'll talk more about that. So intervention table, I grade this the same way I do the evidence table. It's a medium stakes assignment. And so you can see I provide the exact same instructions here around not following APA, lacking detail, copy, pasting, etc. The theory papers, this is my high stakes assignment. Let's talk about this one. So with my theory paper, I deduct more points, but I'm also very specific about what I want. And so you can see I give students a maximum word count of 2,000 double-spaced words, APA 7. I tell them the tables and the references don't count. They have to write the paper for a priority population and a modifiable behavior. I tell them specifically how they need to begin each paper, what they need to do, what citations to provide. I give them recommendations for how to set up their tables. So I have a lot of very specific instructions. These instructions, if you go back and look at the top of my syllabus and you start looking at the competency and you start looking at the learning objectives for the course, you're going to see a parallel between the competencies, my course learning objectives, and what you're going to see in this major assignment. This is how I'm evaluating their competency mastery in my course. And so I am very explicit about what I'm looking for. You'll also see in here I require peer review and other things that are in my learning objectives, right? So a lot of what my main course learning objectives and content mastery for the competency, they're all built into this assignment for the most part. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And those that aren't are informed by or inform this assignment. So in order to be successful on this assignment, students would have already had to have a focus statement written where they know what they're going to do. And they need to have completed the evidence table and the intervention table. With all that completed, now they've built the skills and the knowledge to successfully write these papers. And then you can see I have very specific instructions because PhDs and DRPHs do slightly different things. And now look how much more detail I have on grading. Again, I choose not to use a rubric for this assignment. That is a somewhat controversial decision, but I choose not to do it, in part because I am a tough grader on these assignments. I believe one of the best ways to teach is to help students correct any mistakes they made. And so for this particular assignment, I tell all of my students, my goal is for you to keep me from having you do a rewrite. My goal as a grader is to make you do a rewrite. Because if I can have a student do a rewrite and correct every mistake they made before, I'm setting them up for future success. So the way I structure this course to be really transparent is if anyone makes below a 23, they have a mandatory, out of 30, they have a mandatory rewrite. So 7 mistakes, mandatory rewrite. And those mistakes can be as small as grammatical and spelling errors to as large as not fully articulating a construct or a concept or failing to provide appropriate citations. It's pretty broad in scope. I expect the students to answer every single one of the questions in their instructions completely with citations. And what I'm doing there is my way of teaching, again, because I'm interested in competency. I want to show competency mastery. I want to show that my students who made a mistake corrected that mistake. And not only did they correct that mistake, but then with their second paper, which is the exact same format as the first paper, just with a different theory, same population, same behavior, different theory, they're able to show with that second paper, knock on wood, that what they learned from doing the rewrite, they applied and they knocked their second paper out of the park. And with most of my students, it works. So what ends up happening, nearly every student in 1122 gets a rewrite. They make those corrections, they get a second score on that rewrite that is a high score, usually an A or a B, and then they have a template for their second one. So now they have practiced 3 times to build competency, and the last 2 times they know what's expected of them. Again, I'm also preparing them for a preliminary exam, so I know what they need to know to pass the prelim, and I'm setting them up for success there. I don't use a rubric because there are things that I want to trigger with different students for a rewrite. So let's say that student A perhaps understands the content, but clearly they had issues with writing and organizing a written paper as it needs to be. I'm going to force them to do a rewrite because I want them to work on their written communication. Another student may have written communication down, but they have a really hard time articulating the constructs and explaining the strengths and weaknesses of a theory for their population and behavior. That's more conceptual. I want that same student to have to do a rewrite. And so I don't use a rubric because my teaching / evaluation method here is around competency mastery, and the rubric to me doesn't do that as well for this particular assignment. So I hope that makes sense to you. It's somewhat controversial. Think about how you feel about it. Do you like that? Do you not like that? Every instructor has a different opinion, including with our own department. So with that in mind, after students have written their theory papers, I have a synthesis assignment in which I ask them to draft an abstract and a poster using an APHA format. And basically what they're doing is they're summarizing in a poster presentation everything they learned in the semester and identifying future plans, how what they learned might inform their future research or work with their population and their behavior. So what I'm teaching here is a soft skill around how to write an abstract and how to do a poster and how to present that, because they have to create an online video to present it. But also what I'm doing is now I have documentation to show content mastery. So it's a synthesis document to show mastery of the competency. and ability to apply it to future work, which is really nice thing for CEF to show for CEF. In this assignment, I use a rubric. This is the only assignment where I use a rubric, and I do it in part because I'm having students grade each other. So again, this is really a medium stakes assignment, medium to low stakes assignment, in that students have to do quite a bit of work. It doesn't count that much towards points, and I have students grade them, which means everyone gets a high A every time. I've never had a student really torpedo another student. Not saying it couldn't happen, but it usually doesn't when you have students grade each other. And what I'm doing there too, by having the students do the grading, is I am trying to have the students leave the course with some confidence, self-efficacy, if you will, that they understand this competency and they are able to articulate how they're going to use what they learned going forward. And I want them to leave my course feeling good about what they've learned and to be thinking about how to apply it to future research. So I don't want their last assignment to be a killer assignment. I want their last assignment to really be something that's creative and fun and future oriented. So that's why I do the poster assignment. It's a little bit on the creative side, and it teaches a practical skill that most students want to learn more about doing anyway. All right. That is my approach to developing instructions and grading for a major assignment. For this class, you need to develop the instructions and the grading for a major assignment, whether you use an actual rubric or whether you do something like I did for the theory paper, where you're being really specific about your grading and explaining why you're doing the type of grading that you're doing. For this class, you all are going to need something like the theory paper or the abstract and poster. You need to be at that level for the major assignment. It needs to link back to your competency and to your course learning objectives. I hope this helps, and I look forward to seeing your finished products.